Welcome to Discovering Justice. You can see this program again and many of our other programs by following us on the internet at www.discoverinjustice.net. My name is Lucy Rivera and I am your host. Today we have the Chief Law Enforcer Officer of Suffolk County, Mr. Dan Conley. Thank you for being here. District Attorney Dan Conley is the DA of Suffolk County. Suffolk County is made up of districts like Roxbury, Dorchester, Boston, Chelsea, East Boston, and how many people are there in this county, District DA Conley?
Yeah, it's as you mentioned, Lucy, it's all those communities you mentioned. In addition, there's the towns of Revere, Winthrop, and Chelsea. Actually, the cities of Revere and Chelsea, north of Boston, and the town of Winthrop. There's about 750,000 people that live in this tiny corner of Massachusetts, very densely populated primarily because of its urban nature.
And complex, densely populated and complex with all the diversity of people.
Tremendous amount of diversity, probably the most racially diverse county in Massachusetts, maybe New England.
Very interesting, and it's a handful, District Attorney Conley. When did you became a district attorney? When did you become district attorney? Talk to us about that.
Well, I've been associated with the office, believe it or not, since 1984. For a good stretch of time, from 84 to 1993, I was an assistant district attorney. But I became the district attorney in the year 2002 when my predecessor resigned before the expiration of his term, and I was appointed by the governor in February of 2002. That was an election year in the Commonwealth, so I was also a candidate immediately for the office. And in a spirited race, there were 4 candidates in the race. I was able to prevail, and I was elected in November 2002. Since then, I've been elected 2 other times, in 2006 and again just last November in 2010. So I've been serving for close to 9.5 years at this point.
Yeah, and it's a great job, DA Conley. If people want to learn about your office, where would they? How did they find your office? How do they find it?
Yes, I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, but Google my name. I don't have the exact, www address at the tip of my tongue, but I believe it's suffolkda.mass.gov or something like that. But if you just go to the Google and Google Suffolk County, Boston, Suffolk County DA, Boston, Dan Conley, Boston, C-O-N-L-E-Y, by the way, it'll pop up. I mean, it'll be the top, the site that pops up, and then you can learn quite a bit about our office. We actually have a new website, and it's not complex, but there's much data on there that people can really read about what we do and how we do it.
Thank you, DA Conley. When you were a district attorney yourself, and you know the ropes of this, and have things changed much since the time you were a district attorney to now that you're the DA?
Yeah. Well, I was very proud of the work that I did back in the 80s and 90s, but the job has even evolved into, a more specialized practice of prosecuting and practicing law. In my day as a young ADA, there were very few specialty units in the office. By that I mean, a homicide unit, which definitely existed in those days, but no child abuse unit. So any prosecutor would pick up a child abuse case. Those are very tough cases. Those require specialized training, certain types of lawyers who are really drawn to that work, I think, who are compassionate and passionate about it. We have specialty units now involving gangs and how to deal with gang members, how to get the most out of them as witnesses and as victims and so forth. We have a safe neighborhood initiative. But anyways, there's been quite a bit of specialization from the time I left in '93 to the time I returned, just 9 years later. Then again, the city and the county, things changed quite a bit, sort of just in the way people approach law enforcement. We've had a lot of difficulty with some communities' willingness to cooperate, for example, with us. When I left the DA's office in 1993, historically white neighborhoods like South Boston and Charlestown had what was known as a code of silence. And when I returned from the DA's office to the DA's office in 2002, those communities had sort of softened their stance a bit on that, where other communities like Roxbury and Dorchester, Mattapan had instituted, I guess, the equivalent of a code of silence, where the police would respond to a crime scene. People certainly were present and saw what happened and would say, I don't know what happened, I didn't see anything, I don't know what you're talking about. Victims even who had been shot or stabbed or beaten would deny that they knew anything about what had happened to them. So that was a great frustration and a great change. But overall, the office was a professional office. I think that it was a good office, and I made it my mission, though, to try to improve upon a good thing, and we try to continue to move forward. I think we all agree that there's only one thing to do, and that's get better each and every day, so that's what we try to do.
And I also, with not only the time, but information and technology that have been, probably when you were a district attorney, technology was different.
Oh, yes.
Much with the advancement of technology. Talk to us about the role of technology in your office and how you're taking advantage of this new technology.
Well, I mean, just to think about some of the things that have changed, just, you know, and it's not just in our practice, but in the whole world. When I left the DA's office, I was handwriting my memorandum of law and asking a secretary to type it in a word processor. Today, all the prosecutors have at their disposal, you know, a full personal computer with not only access to the internet, but access to a full law library at their tips. You know, in my day, I had to leave the building, get to the law library, that kind of thing. So as far as efficiency goes for the lawyers, much, much better. On the street, and the police, things have changed quite a bit. And the big, you know, the major change has been, you know, the DNA, the discovery. DNA was known, but the ability of scientists to extract DNA material from evidence sources like clothing or bed sheets or even fabric rugs and, you know, chairs like this, and then link it to an individual has been you know, just an incredibly great, you know, development in science, and it's helped us not only convict the guilty, but as you well know, having practiced on the other side of the equation, exonerate the innocent. Right. And, you know, when I first became DA, that was, you know, I was confronted with those kinds of questions. Old cases where individuals had been in jail for 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, sadly, on the basis of faulty evidence. And then we see some of the DNA evidence that was, you know, preserved, and, you know, sometimes, you know, police would be criticized, but thankfully they retained all of this evidence that was able to be tested years later. They didn't just throw it out, we got the conviction and then throw it out, they saved it. Now all of a sudden, 10 years later, 5 years later, we have this new ability with DNA evidence. Let's look at it. Now we've looked at it in 3 or 4 cases, we got the wrong guy. You know, and I wasn't the DA at the time, but I have a responsibility to look at those old cases. But other times we've looked at the evidence and we have a protesting defendant and it's proved beyond all doubt that he was actually the perpetrator, you know, so, but we've been able to convict the guilty, we've been able to exonerate the innocent. Even before we get to court, you know, the police might be looking at a certain suspect for a certain case, and then they evaluate that suspect's DNA against the known DNA that was found at the crime scene and immediately eliminate that guy. Otherwise, that guy could have been, you know, under great scrutiny by the police and perhaps even been charged. So DNA has been a valuable asset not only for prosecutors but also for defendants, potential defendants.
Technology in general, and it's wonderful, and that's something that not only has helped the police but also the DA's office. I think you were talking to me about fingerprints and also...
fingerprint evidence, you know, has been around, as you well know, for more than 100 years. And it has come under some attack recently, but even the science of that has expanded, gotten better with better microscopes, better, you know, abilities to, you know, fully extract the fingerprint from the surface. They call that the latent print, and, you know, that has been, you know, great. Ballistics evidence developments have been, you know, quite helpful, and the advent of video surveillance footage, you know, where, you know, we have cases now all over our office where we have captured the crime on video. It's pretty hard for a defendant to say it didn't happen this way when it's actually captured. We can, you know, we can put it on a television screen and show it. So that has been a big expansion and a great development too.
And DA Conley, in your office, as far as when crime scene investigation goes, and if there is something happens and there's a crime, police goes, what's the role of the DAs when there's a scene and there's crime?
Well, in most instances, we rely on the police to investigate the case from beginning to end, and then they present the evidence to us and you know, suggest that there's enough evidence to charge a defendant. Really, our job is to review that evidence and make a decision. They may have arrested somebody, but if we are dissatisfied, then we will just not go forward with the case. But in most instances, the police do a very good job, and we agree with them that they've, you know, the investigation has been thorough, and when we bring the case. But in the case of homicide, which I think may be where you were going in with your question, is under Massachusetts law, the district attorneys are in charge of murder investigations. Now that sometimes surprises people because they don't think of us as investigators, but under Mass law, we are required to begin and control the investigation. So that requires, first and foremost, though, us, meaning DAs from around Massachusetts, selecting a police department to actually do the work on the street, so to speak. So in Boston, we rely on the Boston Police. We've designated them to do that. In Revere, Chelsea, and Winthrop, we've designated a state police unit that's assigned to our office to do that. Both very good, both highly competent, both highly skilled. But the DAs themselves are there on the crime scene, and then a high-level prosecutor will take over the case in the first few hours. And we now do a lot of work in the grand jury, use the grand jury as an investigative vehicle, rather than simply rely on what a witness tells us on the street. We will bring that person before the grand jury, and under, you know, testimony-type conditions, we interrogate the witness, and everything is transcribed, everything is under oath. There's a, you know, there's a real certainty to the event that's occurring, and we have a lot of documentation to our investigation. We found that to be quite helpful because of the difficulties with witnesses and fear and intimidation. We sometimes run into people who will testify to one thing at the grand jury, and then 6 months or a year and a half later, they don't remember what they said in front of the grand jury, or, you know, perhaps they do remember, but they just don't want to cooperate. But we now have it documented, and it's been a great help to have these investigations so thoroughly investigated, not only on the street by the police, but also by the district attorney and the grand jury.
And DA Conley, what is the grand jury? If you would talk to us about that.
Yeah, the grand jury, I'm sure most of your viewers have heard the expression, but a lot of them might not fully understand what it is. But the grand jury sits usually for 3 months, sometimes 4. So it's not like if you get jury duty, it's not like getting called into jury duty, getting one trial, and you know, and then not having anybody, after that one case, not going any further with it. The grand jurors will sit for months at a time and will listen to evidence on many, many, many cases. They only hear one side of the story. They only hear our side of the story. There is no judge in the grand jury. There is no defense attorney in the grand jury. There is no defendant in the grand jury. We simply call witnesses that are favorable to the prosecution typically, although we, in our practice, we put forth exculpatory evidence as well. We want to give the grand jury the whole picture. But anyways, the grand jury is made up of 23 people. And when they consider a case, they don't have the same high standard that a regular trial jury has. A regular trial jury has a very high standard, as you well know, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But the grand jury, their standard of proof to decide whether a case should be indicted or not is probable cause, a very low threshold. Is it more likely than not that the defendant did what the prosecutor says he did? All they're doing is saying there's enough here to send this to a different court for a full-blown trial. And that process, as you know, Lucy, is called, you know, an indictment. When they find probable cause, they issue what's known as a true bill, and then the defendant is, you know, indicted, and he is brought then before the Superior Court and accused formally. and then you get the full-blown trial.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Today we have the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Suffolk County, District Attorney Dan Conley. He's our guest today, a very special guest. And my name is Lucy Rivera, and I am your host for Discovering Justice. DA Conley, you mentioned that in the grand jury you're putting evidence. Part of that evidence, sometimes for your cases, it's made up of witnesses. And as you mentioned, witnesses vary, and they may be afraid sometimes to testify. How do you address that problem?
Yeah. Well, we are confronted with, quite a few problems in our cases involving guns and serious violence. We've had many instances where dozens of people have seen a crime occur. And when the police get there, those dozens have scattered. And that's probably natural. People see a gunshots and, what are they going to do? Wait around for the police to come? Yeah. But a lot of times what happens is there's a great scattering when the event occurs. Then people are drawn back to the scene of the crime. And so when the police get there, there's lots of people there. And when you ask the question, can anyone tell us what happened? One by one, we get a lot of, I didn't see it, I don't know what happened. And we find that in many instances not plausible, especially in a confined area, house party, nightclub, whatever the case may be. You're really surprised that so many people say, I saw nothing, I know nothing, I don't want to get involved. There are two reasons for that, or three reasons maybe. One is genuine fear. That if I step forward and I tell the police what I know, what I saw, what I heard, I'm putting myself in harm's way. So you have people like that who are genuinely fearful. Yes. Then you have people who believe that what happens in the courthouses of Boston and Massachusetts is not the way they choose to seek justice, meaning that they'll take care of matters themselves. We've had many instances where people have been shot or stabbed, and they tell the police, I don't know who shot or stabbed me. They tell us, I don't know who shot or stabbed me. And then there is no case because we don't have any, suspect or defendant. Again, implausible. What we believe is more likely to happen is that person will go out and handle matters on their own. There's also a code, an unwritten code, sometimes referred to as the Stop Snitching Code. And that is just a pervasive code among the young people in the city that, something, it's just wrong to cooperate with police, even if you are the victim, which is a very troubling phenomenon that we, constantly speak out against. So we run into that, and that sort of thing. And then the third category is a serious category, and that is people who are actually intimidated. They are intimidated by somebody connected to the defendant or the defendant himself, and they are petrified, right? That happens, but I'm happy to say it happens in only the rarest of cases. I mean, so you have people who are fearful that there might be retribution, but there's never been any act to suggest that they are going to be. But they just are fearful. Then you have the people who just simply say, hey, I'll handle it myself. The code says we don't cooperate. And that third category, people who are really, intimidated, and it's happened before. What we do in those instances is we protect those citizens. Okay. When I became the DA, I saw this as a real problem. We can't let gang members and violent people take over our city. It's a tiny fraction right now. Police estimate maybe 400 young people in our city that cause 80 to 90% of the violence in our city. Think about that, just in a city of more than 600,000, what a tiny fraction. Right. We focus and we spend an awful lot of money trying to get this group, this cohort, under control. It's not easy. But we cannot let them intimidate their way out of accountability. So I felt that it was very important for us to have a witness protection program. I knew that we did not have the resources to match the federal witness protection program, where literally people are taken in and their lives are fully transformed. They're given a new identity. They're moved to a different part of the country. We don't have the resources to do that. But we do have the resources to provide short-term and even long-term physical protection through police details. We do have the ability to help people move If they live in one neighborhood of Boston and they want to move to another, or even out of the city, we're able to help them with that. We're able to help get their children assigned to different schools. We're able to help them if they're public housing residents to get into another public housing, or get a voucher to go to another community altogether. There's a lot of things we can do to help first and last month's rent, things of this nature. And that's a pool of money that is held by the Executive Office of Public Safety. And the decisions that are made to do that are very carefully made. I mean, we have to really make sure that the person's not trying to just play the system,
right,
but they are genuinely intimidated, they are genuinely fearful. And then, you know, we're able to protect lots of people, and we've done that, and it's been quite successful.
And that's for witnesses, and also does that include victims?
Yes, it does. Yep.
Would you do the same program, the same protection?
Same protection, yeah. And a lot of times it is victims that we protect, you know, who feel that, you know, when we've had a case, I won't name names or anything like that, but released in a case, a couple of very dangerous guys were on trial. And, you know, there's a lot of pervasive fear around that trial, and in that case we had to take precautionary steps, you know, to protect witnesses and victims, so.
That's a great job, and I believe that this is important because you need these witnesses for your cases.
Well, I tell that to people all the time. You know, I go to community meetings out in our city a lot. A lot of times it's in communities that we aren't, you know, that are very hard hit by this, you know. You know, you live in there's certain communities in Boston that are extremely safe. There's never any violence or trouble, and others, obviously, where there's more of it. So you go into these communities where there's more violence and say, look, we're here to help. We're not the enemy. Our first goal is to serve victims. Our first goal is to assist communities, you know, negotiate and handle this, you know, influx of violence and the like. And but we tell them that you know this well as a trial lawyer, you know, if we don't have good people who can summon the moral courage and the character of citizenship to stand up there and say, you know, I saw that, this is what he did. You know, nothing, you know, against him personally. So this is what he did, you know, and so far too few people are willing to do that. But thank goodness that in almost every case, there's, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 people that are. Right. If we stand together as a group, though, think about those scenarios where I talked about 40, 50 people at a house party and only 1 or 2 will testify. Well, if all 40 people testified or were willing to testify, there's a lot of strength in that, you know.
In order to achieve justice, we need the witnesses and we need the cooperation with law enforcement officers.
Absolutely.
D.A. Conley, we don't have a lot of time, but I know that you had taken some initiatives on cyberbullying, and if you want to say a few words about that, your initiatives.
Sure, yeah, you know, this is an issue that has brought to the forefront more than a year ago when a young woman from Western Massachusetts, right, a 15-year-old woman from Massachusetts, Phoebe Prince, took her own life, and it was very tragic, and you really see how pervasive this problem is among our young population. Pardon me, gotten worse through the use of handheld devices and text messages and the like. So we're out there in the schools talking to the kids all the time, trying to make them understand that treat people as you'd like to be treated, the golden rule. And, you know, this stuff is going to be taken seriously if they cross the line.
And that's one of the initiatives in your office, and it's very in line with what you're talking about, the technology and what your office is taking steps to keep up with the technology and using it.
Yeah, yeah.
So our guest today was District Attorney Dan Conley, and he's here today to talk to us about what the District Attorney's Office is doing in terms of crime fight as the Chief Law Enforcer Officer in Suffolk County. My name is Lucy Rivera, and I was your host today for Discovering Justice. And today we had D.A. Conley. Thank you so much for coming to our program. Unfortunately, it's come to an end, but we did learn a lot about your office and about the great work that you're doing for all of us in Massachusetts.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lucy. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you. Please visit us at www.discoveringjustice.net if you'd like to get more information about this program. And don't forget to contact me at 617-266-6001 if you have any questions or any suggestions on any future programs. Thank you.